So I have a love-hate relationship with making animation. On one hand, it's super exciting and satisfying when you see that finished product, but on the other hand, it takes freaking forever. Like, I'm talking about 6 months for a 2-minute video that just has a plain white background. Like, the amount of love, blood, and tears you put into a project is crazy. Like, deadass, I spent 5 hours studying the One Punch Man nutsack shot and then recreating it.
The Fortnite boss, you want him, you want him. Fortnite boss, you want him, sussy, sussy.
But today, we're just gonna make a nice and easy walk cycle. So I teamed up with Art of Amp 217 and he created this cool character sheet. He took my robot and drew it in a Very Odd Parent style, and it looks amazing. What's even better is he took all my complicated designs and simplified it, so making an animation of it is going to be so much easier. I have this bad habit of adding a bunch of BS to designs, and what he did is he cut it down to the meat and potatoes, which is very important for animation. Now there's 2 ways I can go about this. I can either do keyframe animation or I can do frame by frame. For the running animation, I'm going to do frame by frame because it has a little bit more life to it. Keyframe is good for panning shots, but for like complicated angles, I would recommend doing frame by frame. Keyframe is good, but there's a lot of setup, and because I don't have a rig for this robot, it just might be more easy to do this frame by frame because it's a short project. If I have like a long form project, maybe look into getting a rig and it'll help you save some time in other areas. The first thing I did was go on Google Images and looked up run cycle animation, because why reinvent the wheel twice? When I first started animating, I thought the more frames the better, but that is completely wrong, and sometimes less is more, and the lack of frames is what adds impact to things. So for this running cycle, I'm just gonna do 5-frame loop, and that should get me through most of this project. I'm gonna use 12 frames per second because it's a good mix of smooth and choppy. For the drawing software, I use OpenToons because I can just draw on it and it has onion skinning. So first you want to do the rough drawings so that you have a good sense of motion. And then once you're happy with how that motion plays out, then you can start getting into like better line work. So I'm pretty happy with how like the line work is and the motion. I'm gonna move it to Photoshop because OpenToons is good, but I've always had this problem where it takes an input randomly on the screen and it connects those 2 lines and it messes up my lines, and then I can't even undo it. I have to erase it manually, and it did this too many times and I was just over it. So I'm just gonna export all the frames and then send it to Photoshop. I'm not gonna lie, this part it gets kind of ugly because it's not the most efficient way, but it kind of worked. So pretty much I exported each line work into its own layer, and then under that line work, that's where I did the flat, and then I kind of just did the shading all in one layer. Try to keep things simple when you're doing coloring, because whenever you add new things, your work grows exponentially, because you're gonna be doing that same addition like 5 frames, and then let's say you want to add sparkles, you're gonna have to do that to 5 frames. You want to add a little bit of shading, you're gonna have to do that to all 5 frames, and it can expand a lot. So I'm pretty happy with the flat color. Add a tiny bit of highlights, and then I'm gonna add just a tiny bit of texture to this work. Chowder does this thing where you have this like this texture just kind of overlaid. I'm gonna do that with like a grunge texture, and it kind of makes it look a little bit less flat. So this all looks fine and dandy, but it's kind of boring. He's just running in a white void. So I'm gonna add a background to it, and I'm gonna animate the background using keyframes. And normally the easiest way is just to have like a loop and then make sure your left and right side matches each other so you don't do the seams. But for this project, I'm just gonna try to hide it with the foreground element. And what I'm doing is I'm separating the backgrounds into different layers. That way they can move across the screen at different speed, and that's going to give an illusion of 3D. So now it's time to export everything. For the run cycle animation, I'm going to name it 0 to 5. That way it can be used as an image sequence, and it's just going to loop that running animation. And then for the background, I separate it into different layers to export it. And then I'm gonna bring it into a video editing software. You can use CapCut, you can use Premiere. As long as you have different layers, this kind of works the best. So with parallax scrolling is you want the foregrounds to move faster than the backgrounds, and the farther you go back, the slower it's gonna move. So like the ground's gonna move super fast, the character's gonna move fast. The buildings are going to move medium, and then the background like clouds and mountains are going to move the slowest, and this gives the illusion of 3D. So I got a little bit of seams, and I'm just going to use a foreground element to kind of hide the seams. And then another thing that I like to do is add camera shake. That way you can't see the like mistakes, and sometimes it's best just to hide the mistakes. So add a little bit of camera shake, add a little bit of like particles and noise, and then I like to add a little bit of glitch effect, and that kind of just brings everything together. Alright, without further ado, here is the run cycle. So yeah, I'm pretty happy with it. I mean, you know, you can always do more, but sometimes animation is just about cutting corners, because the more complicated, the more time, and you only got so much time, so don't be afraid to cut corners. I just want to say thank you, Art of Ant 217, for that awesome character turnaround sheet. If you guys haven't checked out his videos, go check it out. He got a bunch of good vibes, and he's always constantly grinding and working on his craft, and I enjoy watching his videos. So if you guys need some more art inspiration, go check my boy out. He worked really hard making this character sheet turnaround, and if you want to see his process and his video of making the turnaround sheet, check on the link below. Alright guys, have a good one.